Now, today's start of the annual 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign has placed the focus on how the criminal justice system is failing survivors. Now, recently, a disturbing incident involving a man released on parole after serving time for a rape conviction has caused shockwave. He was arrested for allegedly then raping 2 minors in a Pretoria hotel. Now, one civil society group is particularly concerned about the apparent ineffectiveness of the criminal justice system in rehabilitating sexual offenders. They're calling for the clinical castration of rapists. The group, calling themselves Not in My Name, is championing this campaign. We're joined for more on the story now by Secretary General Themba Masongo to explain the movement. We're also joined by Advocate Romeo Nthambeleni to tell us more about the legalities around a campaign like this one. To both of our guests, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM report. Themba, I want to begin with you this morning. Your group, Not in My Name, calling for some real changes in how the lives of those who have been convicted of sexual violence in our country can be affected, how real changes can be affected in their lives so that they don't go out and re-offend. Clinical castration is what you're calling for. Tell us more about how you came up with this as a possible solution.
Indeed, and thank you so much for having us, and good morning to the viewers at home. The reason why we are saying this is that we are currently faced with a pandemic that seems not to be, letting down. Men in this country have decided to wage war against women and children, particularly heinous crimes such as child rape. Where you've just mentioned about this man Amos Khumalo. We need to mention his name because he's appeared and he's actually confessed to the crime that he has raped 2 young children and messed their lives up. They will never be the same again. And our justice system does not seem to deter any criminal such as this one from actually doing these type of crimes again. And our job as activists is to try and come up with sustainable solutions which will make sure that we protect the marginalized in our country, especially when it comes to crimes like raping of children and killing of young children and the elderly. These people have clearly shown that they don't want to be part of society. They've clearly shown that they are predators and they are preying on the most vulnerable in our society. And us taking them to prison, feeding them 3 meals a day, and hoping that we will somehow, by some magical way, rehabilitate them is not going to work. Yep. Especially when they're going in, they're getting life sentences. There's no way of them coming out. To deter the other people who are thinking of such things, the best thing, because we don't have a death sentence in the country at the moment, is for us to actually go out and castrate them, because these things of theirs are bothering.
And I want to bring in Advocate Romeo Nthambeleni to now discuss the legalities of something like clinical castration for those who have been convicted of gender-based violence, particularly, Themba, if I'm understanding you correctly, particularly those involving children. Advocate Nthambeleni, I mean, before it even gets out of the starting blocks, something like this has failed because we are in a constitutional democracy.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I think it's quite an important point to mention that we do acknowledge that there's a serious crisis in the country relating to rape in general, not only for minor children, women in general. I think that should be a very clear point where we make it clear that we make no bones about that. One, and the second point is that, as you have mentioned correctly, the challenge that we're facing in South Africa is the constitution that we have. And the constitution in section 12 deals with the right to bodily integrity. And that right to bodily integrity will actually be infringed upon when such a proposed a solution like castration is supposed to be made on an individual or a person. So it affects the human rights of a person and the rights to reproduction. And the most important and the critical question which we have to ask is whether, as we have just been hearing now, we have to limit the rights of those that offends on the rights of other people, and whether the question is, the more important question is whether this proposed solution is a solution that will work long term, dealing with the sexual pathology of the offenders. Because looking at the history and the pathology of offenders, you will find that we cannot apply a one-size-fits approach for everyone, because some sexual offenders have the history of their own, and we have to look and make a comparative analysis, before we apply a blanket approach, which is looked as a reactionary tool to actually deal with the problem without addressing the psychological problems that are embedded in the problem of rape that we have as a country. A case in point will be the case of a famous mathematician in the UK, by the name of Alan Turing, who was administered the clinical castration, and at the end of the day, he went into this depression which he never recovered from. So we have to look at those elements. But as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that we have in South Africa, I think it will be a very difficult challenge, because remember, the ANC Women's League was calling for it in 2018 already, in the case of Nicholas Nino, that this should be debated. And the same debate that was brought in the Constitutional Court in the case of State versus Makwanyane will come into the picture again, relating to the right to life, to say, how do you balance the interest? So we have to find a lasting solution to this real problem that exists in our society.
Yeah,
but our Constitution has our hands tied.
Yeah, I mean, it signals the kind of desperation point we have reached as a country as we think about our rates of violence against women and children. To both of our guests, I'm going to ask you to please stay with us. Well, as we continue with our discussion now around the ineffectiveness of our criminal justice system in rehabilitating offenders, particularly offenders of gender-based violence, one campaign called Not In My Name is calling for the clinical castration of rapists. We're in conversation with Themba Masongo. He's the Secretary General of Not In My Name. Advocate Romeo Nthambeleni is also giving us some legal advice on this issue. And I want to just pick up with you, Themba, and talk about, when we look at the data, for example, when we think about things like the death penalty, that's a discussion that comes up every now and again when we see serious cases of murder and also sexual offences raising their ugly heads in our country. The issue of the death penalty comes up again and again, and yet there is so much data here in South Africa and around the world that talks about the fact that the death penalty, in fact, is not a deterrent for serious crime. Why do you think that clinical castration will be a deterrent when it comes to issues of gender-based violence?
100%, and those facts are true, that the death sentence is not a deterrent. But however, those facts have not been proven when it comes to clinical castration. And that is actually part of being an activist. That goes to the core of being an activist, is actually challenge existing constitutional laws to actually get the powers that be, our legislators, to actually see that perhaps one of the permanent solutions of actually getting this heinous crime rate down is actually by going to that extreme measure. Yeah. And we will be able to deter some of these would-be perpetrators, because we are a country that is forever looking at the side of the perpetrator, but never the victim. You get into court, the guy is allowed to be able to get a state attorney that represents him. The family of these two children don't even have an attorney. We have to run around and try to get a competent attorney to be able to stand on their behalf. He goes into prison. He doesn't have bail. He's got 3 square meals a day. We have to run around to get food parcels to get this family to be able to at least be able to have some sustainability, make sure that they've got transport to come back to court, and all of those things. So we need to be able to now become focused on the victim of these crimes. And what we are saying is that it's not a blanket issue, a blanket answer to the question. We are saying particularly to heinous crimes such as this, where an able-bodied 100% person in their mind goes and does such a thing and takes advantage of poor children, and what about the lives of these children thereafter? So we are saying that we are willing to take this campaign on and actually lobby the powers that be, lobby our legislators, and say this is one of the ways where we can drastically bring down this pandemic that we are currently facing. And this is one of the ways that we can have sustainable change.
Yeah.
Because people to action, and when we see somebody totally taken off, we are going to start seeing drastic and proper results. And, when we talk about the rights of the perpetrator and their right to life and their right to, able-bodiedness, what about what they have done to these little kids? These little children are facing now a situation where they might not ever be able to give birth. As I'm leaving this interview this morning, we're going to the doctors, we're going to get results to find out what the type of trauma and what the type of injuries this guy has sustained on these children.
Advocate Nthambeleni, it speaks to something that you talked about just in your previous answer when you talked about the fact that clinical castration for a perpetrator infringes on their right to bodily function, their right to bodily integrity. Is our criminal justice system not victim-centered enough? Are the rights of the perpetrator, because if I'm hearing you correctly, Themba, that certainly is the assertion that is made by activists like Themba Masongo, the rights of the perpetrators seem to trump the rights of the victims.
No, thank you. I think if we have to look into that, we'll have to relook into the entire Bill of Rights in our Constitution that give the presumptions of innocence to every accused person. So it's trying to balance the interest of the human rights with the interest of the victim. And it's quite important to say that it looks like our Constitution is not more victim centered, as we have actually discussed. It looks like it favors more of the perpetrators due to the previous injustices that were perpetrated in the past in South Africa, where people were falsely accused. There were people that were taken to death penalty that were not supposed to have been taken to death penalty. Let's not forget as well, when we balance the interest of the real victims, that there are cases in South Africa where people are accused falsely of rape. And then, and when there are not such cases, how do you deal with that kind of a situation where people are falsely accused of rape? And then how do you actually balance the interests? And when you have actually meted out that kind of a sentence, or are we going to make specifically this kind of a proposal to work for pedophiles that have been proven to have been repeat offenders? And like we have compared that statistically, when you look at Australia, India, and Russia, and you make comparative analysis on where they use this method of castration, that it does not deter these people to be repeat offenders at the end of the day. But is it a solution that will work on our side, balancing it with the interest of the Bill of Rights, with our indigenous law, and find a proposed solution? I will argue that the Sexual Offences Act, as it is now in South Africa, it's a good act that we can use working on it going forward, because it makes it a maximum sentence. Yep. We have a problem of underreporting. There are cases that are not being reported, and then when it's reported and you get a life sentence, and an example is done, it's going to be quick. But the problem that we have currently in our justice system is that these cases are not coming forward before the courts. And I am for the view that we need to have a specific sexual offences court that deals with these kind of cases, that start from the police, starting from the investigations, the rape kits, and how certain police stations don't even have these kind of kits. So if we have a functioning system where you will have more reporting and high rates of conviction, because you could see in the trial of Omotoso that women don't want to go into the gory details of how these sexual offenses actually occur to them, because it's trauma on their own that they have to carry for their entire life, as the guest has actually indicated. So it's painful, but when we look at a comparative analysis with other countries, the US, there's 9 states in the US that is using this chemical castration, and how do we deal with it? Actually making sure that these people don't come back again, repeat the very same offenses, because now this chemical castration is only used to reduce the libido of these people, and they must do it voluntarily to say that they have a problem and this is the solution. So the question that we should be asking ourselves as South Africans is that if we then start saying that this is a problem and this is a solution, so it means that we are saying that castration will be the solution to this problem going forward. That's the question that we should be asking ourselves.
Yeah. To both of our guests, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Themba Masongo and advocate Romeo Nthambeleni, such an incredibly important discussion, signaling, I think, very clearly the kind of crossroads we are at as a country. We are a country at war with our women and children. Ghastly stories, horrific stories coming from every province around South Africa as we mark today the launch of 16 days of activism